Today's recipe calls for ground turkey. I'm going to show you how to make the perfect weeknight meal, also known as super juicy turkey meatloaf. We add a few different things to really spice it up and make it super tasty. So with that said, let's get started. The first thing we need to do is set the food furnace to the broil mode. Set it on the high setting. This will be for the making of the roasted red peppers for the loaf. Grab 2 medium-sized red bell peppers. Grease both peps with a neutral tasting oil that has a high smoke point. If you don't want to do this extra work, you can always buy the store-bought version. Ensure the entire pepper is covered in the oil. Get in the nooks and crannies. This is the same method we used to make pasta sauce out of peppers. Once things are greased and the oven is ready, toss the half tray into the oven. We want the red veggies to be as close to the broiler as possible. You may have to move the rack up a spot or two for this to happen. Just remember to move it back to the middle once we're done roasting. The roasting process takes a little bit of time. Should take around 20 to 25 minutes or until the skin on the peppers have charred. The skins should have also become wrinkled and have started to pull away from the peppers. Throughout this process, you'll keep rotating the pepper until all the sides have a nice charred color to them. After you've changed the color of the peppers, pull them out of the oven box. Place them in a medium-sized holding device. Cover the device with some plastic wrap. Ensure you get a tight seal with the wrap. We're basically creating a sauna for the bell peppers. We want to trap as much steam and heat as possible. Doing this step will make it a whole lot easier to peel the skins off. Allow them to sweat it out for 5 to 10 minutes. While they're doing that, we can prep some of the other ingredients. Snag a small yellow onion, cut the top off, which is the opposite end of the part that has the hairy root. Can't find a small one? Use half of a medium onion instead. Cut that bad boy in half. Once cut, peel all the skin off. The next cuts we need to make are from side to side. Make small sections that are roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. Make the sections as close to the root of the veg as possible without completely cutting through it. Keeping the root on it will help it stay together, making it a whole lot easier to cut. After you've made that happen, give it a half turn. Cut the onion from front to back, making the 1/8 inch sections again. We are shooting for a small dice on the veg that makes people cry. The next item we need to cut is some garlic cloves. Peel 4 to 5 medium-sized cloves. I find the easiest way to peel the cloves is by cutting both ends off, which makes the skin easier to get off. Treat the vampire repellent like we did the onion, making the teeny tiny sections from side to side, and then cutting the opposite way. From there, mince the garlic. We want super small pieces of clove. You can also use a garlic press or a microplane for this step. Grab some twigs of fresh thyme. Pick about 2.5 teaspoons of fresh herbs. The best way to pick the tiny leaves off the small stick is by starting at the thick base and pulling towards the thin tapered end of the herb. Once picked, give it a rough chop until you end up with small green pieces. Use a sharp knife. Whenever you cut fresh herbs, using a dull knife to do so will bruise the green herbs, turning them a dark color and also turning them bitter in taste. If you're not a fan of thyme, you can also use some parsley or even rosemary, or a combination of all of them. It's your log of meat, so have at it. Now that those items are prepped and ready to go, grab yourself a saute pan or any other type of cooking mechanism. Take the pan and the veg over to the stovetop. Toss the hunk of metal over a heat source. Add about a teaspoon or enough oil that will lightly cover the bottom of the pan. Following that, crank the heat up to a medium level of hotness. Allow the oil to become ripping hot. To check if the oil is hot and ready, drop a few pieces of onion into the pan. If they start to sizzle immediately, you know it's good to go. If so, add all the onion to the pan. We need to season as we go, so give the onions a few small pinches of coarse ground kosher salt. Toss or stir the onion around. This will help ensure everything gets coated in the oil for that proper cook. Saute the goods for 5 to 6 minutes or until the onions start to turn a golden brown. Occasionally give it a mix to prevent things from burning. Once the onion has cooked, add the minced garlic to the pan. Cook the garlic for about a minute or until things become super fragrant in smell. Now that both items have been cooked, pull them off the heat source. Spread the mix onto a half sheet tray in one even layer to allow them to slightly cool down. Set it aside so we can get back to the peppers. Save the plastic wrap, we can use it to hold the skins, making it easier to transfer the stuff to the trash. Peel all the charred skin off the peppers. Also take the stem and core out of the peppers as well. They're easier to peel if they are still slightly warm, so don't let them completely cool down. Ensure you discard all the seeds as well during this process. Now that the peppers are all naked, we need to cut them into a small dice as well. First cut them into 1/8 inch long strips, and then cut them the opposite way into the small dice. Add the cut peppers to the onion garlic mix. If you don't like roasted red pepper flavor, you can always saute the bell peppers like we did with the onion and garlic. Following all that knife work, preheat the oven box to 400 Fahrenheit or 204 Celsius. Add the fresh thyme to the veg mixture. Give it a quick mix up to combine everything into one sloppy mess. Grab a large holding apparatus of your liking. To that, add in 2 pounds or 906 grams of lean ground turkey. Following the turkey, add in the vegetable mix. Combine the meat and veg. Add in 5 tablespoons of ketchup. Use homemade if you have it. I have a video on how to make homemade ketchup, so go check it out. Add the next flavor bomb, also known as Worcestershire sauce. We'll be adding 1 1/2 teaspoons of this stuff to the bowl. Give everything a really good thorough mix together. You can tell if you've achieved a good mix if the peppers and onions are spread throughout the meat. After the mix up, add 1/3 cup or 80 mils of milk of your choosing. This will help ensure the loaf will stay juicy and moist during the baking process. Following the wet ingredients, we need to add some dry ones to the bowl next. Add in 2 cups or 160 grams of panko breadcrumbs. Slightly fold in the crumbs. These will act as a binding agent to keep things together. The next thing we need to add to the bowl of goods is 2 whole large eggs. It's best to crack them in a separate container, just in case you get any shell with them, which happened to me this time. If this has ever happened, you know how much of a pain it is to fish the small shell out of the eggs. It helps if you wet your finger to pick the piece out of the eggs. It works every time. Slightly beat up the eggs before you add it to the bowl. These will also act as a binding agent as well. After adding those, season everything really well with coarse ground kosher salt and some fresh cracked black pepper. Mix it all together until it becomes one giant unit of goods. If the mix seems too wet and won't stay together, you can adjust it by adding more breadcrumbs. To check if the seasoning is to your liking, make yourself a small patty of the loaf mix. Cook it in a saute pan on the stovetop. Once cooked, give it a taste test. Adjust the seasoning as needed with salt and pepper, or even more fresh herbs if you wish. Now that you're satisfied with your meat masterpiece, you need to transfer it over to a half sheet tray. I ended up baking mine on a wire rack over a lined tray, which the rack isn't all that necessary. I do recommend lining your tray for easy cleanup though. You can line it with some parchment paper or with some tin foil. Whatever you decide to use, lightly grease it with some cooking spray or a few small drops of oil. After you've figured out the tray situation and all the meat is on the tray, you need to shape it into a loaf. You can use gloves for this, or you can go barehanded. If using bare hands, get them damp with water. It'll help prevent the meat from sticking to them while you shape it. Shape the goods into a long rectangle of sorts. The shape doesn't need to be perfect. We're mostly concerned about the loaf being the same thickness all the way across. It should be about 3 to 4 inches thick. We want a nice equal level loaf. It's important to understand at this point, depending on how thick or thin you make your loaf, will ultimately determine how long it needs to cook for. Considering that information, you may have to adjust the bake time or how often you check the temp for its doneness. There's one last thing we need to do before we start baking it. Grab a small pan. To that we'll add about a cup of warm water, or enough that it goes a quarter of the way up the side of the pan. We'll toss this in the oven with the loaf while it bakes. This will keep moisture inside the oven, which will help prevent the loaf from cracking. It'll also help keep it juicy. Pro tip, add fresh herbs to this pan of water for that extra fragrant smell of goodness. Toss the pan of water and the meatloaf into the food furnace. Place the loaf on the middle rack of the oven for the best results. Put the pan of H2O on the rack below the meats. This way the steam will rise, helping our loaf out. Set a timer and cook this thing of beauty anywhere from 55 minutes to more than 1 hour long, or until the internal temp reads 160 Fahrenheit or 71 degrees Celsius on a thermometer. Times may vary depending on the oven being used and once again depending on the thickness of the loaf. If you notice that the edges are starting to burn or become darker than you would like, simply cover the loaf with a piece of tinfoil to prevent that from happening. Once the buzzer has rang, pull that hefty monster out of the heat. When temping this thing, it's imperative you stick the thermometer in the thickest part of the loaf. Since it's pretty much level all the way across, we'll temp towards the middle of the meatloaf to get the best reading. It's also very important you take the reading right in the center between the top layer and the bottom layer. Going too high or low with the thermometer, and you'll get a very high temperature read, which may cause you to pull it out of the oven before it's even done baking. We're shooting for the thermometer to read 160 Fahrenheit or 71 degrees Celsius. Hitting this temp will ensure it's cooked properly and it'll also keep it juicy. If it doesn't hit that, toss it back in the oven for a few more minutes to finish baking. Allow it to rest for around 10 to 12 minutes before you cut into it. Letting it rest will let the meat reabsorb its juices. During the resting process, it'll also completely set up, which will give us clean whole pieces that won't fall apart when cut. After you've patiently waited, let's cut into this thing. We'll cut it right in the middle so you can see the center of it. When you slightly push on it, you can see all the juices coming out of it. Be aware the red bell peppers will put off a lot of juice, which will turn the meat a light reddish color. That's why it's best to temp your meatloaf instead of basing the doneness off the thyme or how it visually looks. Grab your favorite plate so we can dig into this thing. Cut as big of pieces as your little meaty heart desires. Pair this with some mashed potatoes and broccoli, or make it into some kind of sandwich deal, or eat it with a ton of ketchup. Whatever you decide to do, just enjoy. Alright, now that our turkey meatloaf is done, let's give it the old taste-a-roo. So looking at it, came out super aesthetically pleasing. We got that nice, deep, rich caramelization color on the outside of it, on all the sides, and especially the top. Unfortunately, both ends got a little bit darker than I had hoped for, but that's easy to fix. Just put some tinfoil over the top of the meatloaf for the last like 10 or 15 minutes to prevent it from getting too dark, and then pull it out and you'll be set. And then if you look on the inside of it, there's that nice pop of color from our red bell pepper and the white as well from the onion. If you close one eye and stand back super far and squint really good, maybe you can see some thyme in there. I really can't, but it just depends on how good your eyes are. And even though it's set out for quite a while, since I was taking pictures and doing other things, it still looks really juicy and it looks like it's gonna be good. So yeah, here's my cut piece that I've been eating on because, yeah. Anyways, let's try it. This thing came out tasty. There's a few things going on for this loaf of meat. The first couple bites you might get that deep, rich, roasted bell pepper flavor, and to build a good base is that onion and garlic. And that garlic kind of stands out a little bit and brings some deliciousness to the table. Then on the next bite, you might get that pop of freshness from our thyme. Thyme and turkey go so well together. You get a little bit of sweetness from our ketchup. Then you get that super distinct flavor from the Worcestershire sauce. Then the caramelization or the crust that we got on all sides of the meat bring a little flavor to the table as well, which is super tasty. Texture-wise, this thing is super juicy and it just kind of melts in your mouth. The panko breadcrumbs bring a little crunchiness to the table, and that caramelization that we got on the outside of it brings a little bit of texture as well. Overall, this thing is just super tasty and you have to make it. This recipe is super simple to knock out. It takes a little bit of work up front, but it's well worth it in the end. And you can customize this thing any which way you want. Maybe get rid of the red bell peppers and use a crazy color like yellow or orange to bring a different flavor profile to the table, or add some mushrooms, or make it a spicy loaf by adding some toasted red pepper flakes, which sound super tasty. And this thing is like the size of a newborn baby, which is the perfect size in my opinion, because you can feed a ton of people at once or have quite a few leftovers throughout the week, which is also super nice. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching. It rained a little bit ago, so I'm gonna go outside and enjoy the cooler weather and hopefully get that rain smell still. So yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Makes no sense. I gotta catch my breath. Darker than I had hoped forward. Not Ford like the vehicle, Ford. Not the number either. The first couple bites you might have gotten. Outside and enjoy the cooler weather. Enjoy, that's a word. Simple to knock out. Drop in the cab. Bites you might get that nice